She had saved this shop with her own money, every invoice, every rent check, every supplier payment, while her husband stood in the next room bragging about his career. And on the night she should have been celebrated for keeping his family afloat, he raised his hand and slapped her across the face in front of every single person who had ever looked down on her. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It changed everything, including what he thought he knew about who he had married. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The afternoon of the party, Vivian Hayes stood alone in the back office of Helen's Hearth and felt the first knot form in her chest. The numbers on the screen in front of her were clean. Cleaner than they had been in 18 months. Actually, she had made sure of that. The accounts payable folder was organized, the rent receipts filed in chronological order, and the supplier invoices reconciled down to the last line. She knew these books better than anyone in this building because she had been quietly writing them for 6 months. She was supposed to be here to help set up for the party. Instead, she found herself standing behind Helen's old desk, staring at a discrepancy she hadn't put there, the lease. The original co-guarantee document, signed by Vivian under her maiden name, V. Meridian, 11 weeks ago, had been replaced. A nearly identical version now sat in its place, but the co-guarantor field was different. It showed only Helen Hayes. Vivian's name had been removed so carefully, so deliberately, that someone who didn't know to look would never notice. Vivian looked. She stood very still for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone, photographed both documents side by side, and sent them to a single contact, D. Cho. His response came in under a minute. I see it. Still standing by. Say the word. She typed back, stand by. She set the phone face down on the desk and listened. From the main floor of the shop, she could hear Helen directing the party decorator, her voice bright and certain, the way it always was when she was performing for an audience. There would be 60 guests tonight. Longtime customers, neighbors, family, a few of Marcus's colleagues. 30 years of Helen's Hearth was worth celebrating. Vivian had been glad to help make it possible. She had been glad to help make a lot of things possible. The back office smelled like old wood and dried lavender. There were bundles of it, tied with twine along the highest shelf. Helen's trademark touch. Vivian had always liked it. She had liked a lot of things about this shop in the beginning, before she understood what liking something cost when you built it back up, for someone who would rather forget you were the one who did it. 6 months ago, she had made a decision in this same room. Helen had come to her weeping, hands shaking, the lease renewal in arrears, and 2 suppliers threatening legal action. The business that Helen had spent 30 years building was 90 days from closing, and she had come to her daughter-in-law because she had no one else to turn to without Marcus finding out. He can't know, Helen had said, gripping Vivian's hands. Please, if he finds out how bad it's gotten, he'll think I'm a failure. I can't let him see me like that. Vivian had said yes. Not because she was naive. Not because she didn't understand the risk. She had said yes because she knew exactly what it felt like to hold something together while it crumbled quietly in your hands. And she hadn't been able to turn away from that. She had transferred $18,000 that same night. She had drafted a simple agreement, 2 pages, clear language, and asked Helen to sign it. Helen had signed it with shaking hands and tear-blurred eyes, saying thank you over and over until the words lost their shape. Vivian had also recorded a brief voice note, Helen's voice, quiet and raw, acknowledging the help and asking for secrecy. Not as a threat, as documentation. She had learned long ago that kindness without a paper trail could become a liability. She had learned it the hard way, more than once. In the months that followed, she covered the rent for 3 consecutive months. She paid down the supplier debts. She arranged a new lease deal through a property connection she had, a connection that ran, quietly, through a company called Crestview Holdings. Though that name meant nothing to Helen or to Marcus. The shop had stabilized. The shelves filled back up. Customers returned, and Helen had stopped saying, thank you, that was fine. Vivian hadn't helped her for the gratitude. She slid the lease copy back into its folder and closed the drawer. From beyond the door, she heard Helen laugh at something the decorator said. A full, easy laugh, the kind a person laughed when they felt safe. Vivian picked up her phone. There were 2 new messages, one from Marcus saying he was picking up champagne and would be there by 6, and one from Daniel that read, "Papers are finalized. I can be on site in 20 minutes if needed." She read both messages and answered neither. Instead, she straightened her jacket, picked up the folder from the desk, and stepped out of the back office into the shop floor. Helen turned and smiled when she saw her. Bright, easy, practiced. "There you are," Helen said. "Could you start setting out not napkin rings?" "They're in the box by the register." Vivian smiled back. "Of course," she said, and she went to find the napkin rings, and she counted them out one by one, and she set them at every place along the party table, even the ones she hadn't paid for. But as she reached the last place setting near the window, she heard Helen's voice shift. Lower, quieter, the tone of a woman speaking with intention rather than warmth. Vivian didn't move. She kept her hands on the table and listened. Helen was on the phone in the storage alcove just past the curtain. "Just tell him the accounts mix-up was her idea," Helen was saying. "He'll believe you. He always does when it's about her." Vivian's hands went very still on the white linen. She finished setting the last napkin ring. She smoothed the edge of the tablecloth and she thought, "All right then." The night Helen came to ask for help, it was raining. Vivian remembered that detail clearly, not because rain was unusual in Seattle, but because Helen had arrived without calling first, which she never did, and she had stood on the front step getting wet for nearly a minute before she rang the bell, as if she had needed that extra time to decide whether she could really go through with it. Marcus was in Denver for a project presentation. Vivian was alone, working at the kitchen table with her laptop and a cup of tea, when the doorbell rang at 8:30. She opened the door and found Helen standing there with her coat soaked through and her eyes red from crying she was trying to hide. "I didn't know where else to go," Helen said. Vivian stepped back from the door. "Come inside." Helen sat at the kitchen table and didn't touch the tea. Vivian placed in front of her. She stared at it for a long moment, then pressed her lips together and said, "The shop is in trouble. Real trouble. I didn't want to say anything because I kept thinking I could fix it, but it's gotten too far and I can't fix it alone." Vivian sat down across from her. She didn't speak. She waited. Helen explained it in pieces, the way people did when they were ashamed of a full picture. The landlord had raised the rent the previous spring. Foot traffic had dropped after a competitor opened 2 blocks away. She had taken a supplier loan to cover the inventory shortfall and hadn't been able to pay it back on schedule. The second loan had covered the first, and then there was a third, and now 2 suppliers were talking to lawyers, and the lease renewal was 90 days out and she couldn't make the payment. "I've been moving money around," Helen said, juggling it. "But it's caught up with me." "How much?" Vivian asked. Helen told her. It was more than she had admitted expecting to hear, but not more than Vivian had guessed. "I can't tell Marcus," Helen said, quickly, definitively, like it was the only thing she was sure of. "He'll think I'm a failure. He's spent his whole life proud of me, proud of this shop, and if he found out how bad it's gotten," she shook her head. "I can't have him look at me that way. I can't." Vivian understood this. She didn't agree with all of it, but she understood it. She had watched for 3 years as Marcus built his entire identity around his mother's strength, his mother's independence, the way she had built something with her own hands. Taking that image away would cost Helen something she couldn't get back. "I'll help you," Vivian said, "but I need you to understand something first. I'm not going to keep secrets from Marcus indefinitely. If things change, if this becomes something bigger, we may have to tell him." Helen nodded. Too quickly, Vivian noticed the nod of a woman agreeing to get what she needed, not the nod of a woman who had truly considered the terms. For now, Vivian said, "Let's deal with what's immediate." She opened her laptop and transferred $18,000 that night from her private account, the one Marcus had never asked about, because she had always managed her own money, and he had always been comfortable with that separation. The transfer went through by midnight. She drafted a simple funding agreement the following day, 2 pages. Clear, specific language. The amounts transferred, the purpose, the acknowledgement that this was a loan arrangement with no interest, to be formalized further if needed. She printed 2 copies and brought them to the shop that afternoon. Helen signed without reading it carefully. She was still so relieved that the immediate crisis was over that the documentation felt like a formality. She signed it, and Vivian folded 1 copy into her bag, and nothing more was said about it. Before she left the shop that afternoon, Vivian did one more thing. She opened the voice recorder on her phone and asked Helen to say, briefly, what she had accepted and why she had asked for confidentiality. Helen's voice on the recording was soft and still slightly cracked from the previous night. I'm accepting Vivian's help for the shop because I have no other way to keep it open right now. And I'm asking her not to tell Marcus because I can't let him know how bad things got. I just can't. Vivian saved the file. She labeled it. Helen's hearth, spoken agreement, month and year. She hadn't created it as a weapon. She had created it because she had learned, working with financial records for most of her adult life, that the people who say, I trust you, we don't need paperwork, are often the same people who later say, I don't remember it that way. She had made that mistake once before, when she was 26, and she had never made it again. Over the following months, she paid the rent 3 times. She covered a supplier invoice. She arranged, through Daniel Cho, a referral to a commercial property contact who could offer Helen a better lease renewal rate, a contact who didn't need to know, and wasn't told, that the introduction came through Crestview Holdings. The company Vivian had co-founded with a college friend 8 years ago and built into something she had never told Marcus about. The shop stabilized. By spring, Helen was talking about the anniversary party with genuine excitement, describing it as proof that the business had turned a corner. In a sense, it had, just not because of anything Helen had done on her own. Vivian had been at peace with that. She hadn't helped because she wanted credit. She had helped because she knew what it felt like to watch something slip, and because she had the means to stop it, and because she had believed, at the time, that Helen was someone worth protecting. She had been wrong about the last part. Sitting now in the car outside the shop, watching Helen direct the decorator through the front window, Vivian thought about the moment she had realized it, not with anger. Just with the quiet, clear-eyed recognition that some people accepted help the way they accepted a debt they planned to default on. She checked her phone. A new message from Daniel. Standing by. Say the word. She set the phone on the passenger seat. She had 1 more hour before Marcus arrived. 1 more hour of being the daughter-in-law who arranged the napkin rings and smiled at the right moments and took up no more space than she was given. After that, she thought, it was time to take up the space she had always owned. The morning of the party, Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time. He adjusted his collar twice, checked the knot of his tie, turned slightly to the side, then back. He did this with the focused attention of a man preparing for something that mattered, not just a family celebration, but a performance, a statement. Marcus Hayes, showing up for his mother's milestone. Marcus Hayes, the dutiful son with the appropriate wife and the promising career. Vivian watched him from the doorway, already dressed, her coffee in hand. You look fine, she said. He glanced at her in the mirror. I want to look good. It's a big night for Mom. I know. She meant that without irony. She did know how much it meant to Helen. She had been making sure for 6 months that there was a shop worth celebrating. Marcus moved to the nightstand and picked up his phone, which had been vibrating intermittently since 7 that morning. He looked at the screen, and something in his posture shifted. Subtle, but Vivian had been watching him for 3 years, and she noticed. His thumb moved quickly, silencing the notification. He set the phone face down. Who's that? She asked. Work thing, he said. Nothing urgent. He said it the way a person said it when they had practiced. Not overly quick, not overly casual. Just slightly more deliberate than a true non-issue would require. Vivian sipped her coffee and said nothing. She had been watching this pattern for 11 weeks. The shifted posture when certain messages arrived. The phone moved to his jacket pocket instead of left on the counter. The calls taken in the hallway instead of the kitchen. She hadn't confronted him, not because she wasn't sure, but because she was very sure, and she had wanted to be certain before she acted. 3 weeks ago, she had been certain. Their phones shared a cloud backup, a setup they had implemented 2 years earlier when Marcus lost an entire week of contacts after a system crash. He had asked her to configure it. She had configured it. Neither of them had ever mentioned it since. Last month, she had opened the backup sync quietly, verified what was there, and closed it again. She had forwarded the relevant files to her own secure storage and never opened them again on the shared system. There was a name in fast backups, Tessa K. There were messages from the past 4 months. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to understand the shape of it. Vivian finished her coffee and rinsed the cup in the sink. Marcus came into the kitchen, jacket on now, looking more settled, the way he always did when he had made a decision and put it away. "I mentioned to Mom that I might bring someone from work tonight," he said. He picked up his own coffee, which had gone lukewarm. Tessa Klein. She's on the acquisitions team at Caldwell. She knows people in commercial real estate. Could be useful for the Crestview connection. Vivian was placing her cup in the dish rack. She paused for exactly 1 second. "The Crestview deal?" she said. "Yeah." Marcus drank the lukewarm coffee without noticing. "We've been chasing that partnership for 6 months, and I still can't get a meeting with whoever's running acquisitions over there. It's frustrating. If Tessa knows someone on the inside, it's worth having her in the room." Vivian turned to face him. Her expression was perfectly even. "Of course," she said. "The more the merrier." He smiled, the easy, grateful smile he used when she didn't complicate things. "Thanks for being flexible about it. I know it's supposed to be a family thing. It's fine, Marcus." He kissed her on the cheek and went to gather his things. Vivian stood at the kitchen counter for a moment after he left the room. She looked at the morning light through the window, at the line of rooftops against the gray Seattle sky. Crestview Holdings had been in quiet existence for 8 years. She and her college friend Nadia had built it from a single property investment into a portfolio worth $43 million at last valuation. The name had appeared in trade publications twice, neither time with Vivian's name attached. They had structured ownership through a holding entity that kept the principals private. She had liked it that way. She understood the value of operating from a position no one could see. In the past 6 months, 3 different real estate development firms had approached Crestview about a partnership. 2 had been politely declined. The third, Marcus's firm, Caldwell Partners, had submitted a proposal that crossed her desk in January. She had read it. She had noted the project lead's name, M. Hayes. She had set the proposal aside. She had not told Daniel to decline it. She had also not told Daniel to move it forward. She had not decided yet what to do with it. Some part of her had been waiting to see what Marcus would do first. Now she knew. She picked up her bag from the counter and checked that her phone was charged. A message from Daniel had arrived while Marcus was in the other room. "Papers are finalized. I can be on site within 20 minutes if needed." She wrote back, "Stand by. We'll know by tonight." She put the phone in her bag and went to get her coat. Outside, Marcus was already warming up the car, which meant he was in a good mood, which meant the call he had taken earlier had gone well, which meant Tessa Klein was going to be at the party tonight, and Marcus thought that was going to help him. Vivian locked the front door behind her and walked to the car. She thought about what it must feel like to be that certain of the story you were living in. She had felt that way once, before she learned that confidence without information was just a pleasant way to be wrong. Helen's hearth looked beautiful that evening. Vivian had to admit that, at least to herself. The shop's front display had been cleared and rearranged to create an open space for guests, with strings of warm white lights woven through the shelving units, and a long table set with the linens and place settings. Helen had chosen months in advance. A banner across the far wall read 30 years of Helen's hearth in deep green script. Somewhere near the back, a catered appetizer station was already drawing small clusters of guests, and the low hum of conversation mixed with soft background music into something that almost felt celebratory. 60 guests arrived in the first 40 minutes. Colleagues from Helen's early days in the neighborhood. Regular customers who had watched the shop change over 3 decades. Extended family from Marcus's side, aunts, cousins, a few of his mother's oldest friends. Vivian moved through the room with the quiet efficiency of someone who had helped plan it, smiling when smiled at, answering questions when asked, and generally maintaining the role she had always maintained in this family. Capable, present, unobtrusive. Helen stood near the entrance greeting each guest personally. She was glowing in a way that Vivian had not seen in months, and Vivian understood why. Tonight, Helen's hearth was a success. Tonight, 30 years of work had a room full of witnesses. What those witnesses didn't know was that 6 months ago, this same room had been in danger of becoming a liquidation sale. Marcus worked the room with the ease of someone who felt entirely at home in it. He introduced himself to people who already knew him and reintroduced himself to people who didn't need reminding. He mentioned the Crestview pitch twice in the first 20 minutes, once to a cousin who worked in banking and nodded without knowing what Crestview was, and once to Helen's longtime accountant, who offered a polite smile and changed the subject. Vivian tracked all of it without appearing to. Tessa Klein arrived at 7:15. She came in through the front door with the unhurried confidence of someone who had decided before entering that she would not be uncomfortable in whatever room she walked into. She wore a dark jacket over a silk top, her hair pulled back simply, her composure so complete it read as elegance rather than effort. She scanned the room once, a quick, professional sweep, and found Marcus. The greeting was controlled. Marcus crossed to her too quickly, then corrected, slowing his last few steps so the approach looked more casual. They shook hands in the way people did when they were performing not shaking hands too familiarly. He said something near her ear. She laughed, brief and low. Vivian was standing 20 feet away, talking to Helen's neighbor, and she saw all of it. She nodded at something the neighbor was saying and turned slightly to keep Tessa in her peripheral vision. Helen appeared at Tessa's side within minutes. Vivian watched Helen's face as she greeted Marcus's colleague, watched for the moment of calculation that would confirm what she suspected. It came quickly. Helen's eyes moved to Tessa's face, and the warmth that spread across Helen's expression was too immediate, too unguarded for a stranger. Helen had seen this woman before. She wasn't surprised by her, she was pleased. Helen leaned in close to say something to an older sister-in-law nearby. Vivian caught only part of it. Refreshing, she heard, and knows what Marcus needs. The sister-in-law made a small, understanding sound. Vivian excused herself from the neighbor and walked toward the side of the room where the anniversary slideshow setup had been installed. The party planner had mounted a large display screen on the eastern wall, connected to a laptop that was running Helen's photo montage. 30 years of the shop, of family gatherings, of milestone moments, all set to gentle music. There was also a secondary connection port unoccupied, a simple HDMI input for external devices. She glanced at it once, then glanced away. She made a circuit of the room, refilling her glass at the drink station, exchanging pleasantries with a cousin who asked about her work. She said she did financial consulting, which was true, technically, and which never prompted follow-up questions, which was by design. She complimented Helen's choice of lighting. She thanked the decorator for his work. She did everything a good daughter-in-law should do at a family milestone event, and she did it with complete attention, because she understood that presence mattered, that being truly, genuinely present right up until the moment you acted was its own kind of statement. Across the room, moved toward the appetizer table. Marcus followed a beat later, navigating through 2 separate conversations to land 3 feet from her, with his back angled slightly away from the room. Their voices were low and Vivian couldn't hear them, but she didn't need to. She had read the messages. She understood the dynamic. What struck her, watching them now, was not the intimacy. She had already known about that. It was the ease, the comfort. The way Marcus's shoulders dropped when he was near Tessa, the way the strain he carried most days seemed to leave his face temporarily. She had loved that ease about him once. She had tried for a long time to be the person who gave it to him. She understood now that she had been trying to give something to someone who was looking for it elsewhere. Near the back wall, Helen was being photographed with a group of longtime customers, laughing and squeezing hands, and performing the exact warmth that 30 years of reputation building required. She was very good at it. Vivian had always respected that, even when it made her uneasy. She pulled out her phone and checked the time. A message from Daniel, on site. Side entrance. Waiting. She typed back a single word, soon. And then Marcus looked up from his conversation with Tessa and found her across the room. Their eyes met. He gave her the easy, confident smile of a man who believed himself to be managing everything well. Vivian smiled back, and then Helen called Marcus over to her with the urgency of a woman who had made a decision, and Vivian watched Marcus's face change as Helen spoke quietly into his ear, watched the ease drain out of him, and something harder take its place. He straightened up. He turned and looked across the room, not at Tessa, at Vivian. Helen moved to the center of the room with the deliberate energy of a woman who had been building toward something for hours. She didn't raise her voice dramatically. She didn't call for attention with a clap or a glass tap. She simply began speaking in a tone that was pitched just slightly above conversation level, and because the room was the kind of room where people listened when Helen spoke, the conversations around her quieted naturally. "I wanted to take a moment," Helen said, pressing a hand to her chest, "to address something that's come to my attention about tonight's setup." Vivian was near the drinks table when she heard this. She set down her glass carefully. "As many of you know, I asked Vivian to take over the shop's vendor coordination in the past months." Helen's expression was one of strained patience, the face of someone who had tried to prevent a problem and been failed. "And unfortunately, there's been a mix-up with one of the display shipments. 3 of the specialty pieces we ordered for tonight arrived short. I found out an hour ago." Murmurs moved through the room. Heads turned. "The order was placed through an account. Vivian was managing," Helen continued, shaking her head gently. "I told her at the beginning that she should check the quantities, but you know how these things go." The room's attention shifted, almost as one unit, toward Vivian. Vivian stepped forward. Her voice was calm and even. "I coordinated the supplier payment, Helen. The order quantities came from the original vendor confirmation you approved in March. If there's a shortfall, that's a delivery error on the vendor's end. I have the confirmation document on my phone if you'd like." "I'm sure you do," Helen said, with the soft, tired tone of someone too polite to argue. "But we can look at the documents later. Right now, I'm just explaining to our guests why the East display looks a little sparse. It was graceful and devastating and entirely calculated." Several guests near the front nodded with the sympathetic understanding of people who had been handed one side of a story and found it sufficient. 2 of Helen's friends from her early years in the neighborhood exchanged a quick glance that said they had filed this information away as relevant. Marcus had been standing near the entrance when Helen began speaking. Vivian watched him process it, watched his face move through confusion, and then, as his mother continued, through the familiar territory of shame. He had grown up in a home where reputation was the currency that mattered most, where a public stumble was a private wound that lasted years. She had seen him absorb those kinds of wounds before. She had seen what they did to him. He crossed the room in the silence that followed Helen's remarks. He was not rushing, but his steps had weight behind them, the kind of weight that came from a man who had decided to do something before he had fully decided what it was. He stopped in front of Vivian. "What happened?" he asked. His voice was low but not quiet. The guests within 5 feet could hear him. "There was a vendor shortfall," Vivian said evenly. "It's a delivery issue. I can show you the original order. That's not what I asked." His jaw tightened. "Mom says you've been overstepping with the shop accounts. She says she told you to limit it, and you kept going." "That's not accurate." "Don't do that," Marcus said, and his voice rose slightly, enough to pull in more of the room. "Don't make me the problem here. Mom is standing in her own shop on the biggest night she's had in years, and you've managed to make her look disorganized in front of everyone she's invited." Vivian looked at him steadily. "I haven't made anyone look disorganized, Marcus. I've been helping keep this shop running for 6 months. If Helen would like to discuss that, we can discuss it. But not like this." 6 months, he repeated, as if the phrase meant something different than she'd intended. 6 months of inserting yourself into something that wasn't yours to manage. 6 months of, he stopped. His voice had cracked slightly on the last word, and she saw him recalibrate, pushing the vulnerability down and replacing it with something harder. The room had gone quiet around them. The music had been lowered. Someone near the speaker had turned it down without being asked, because people in this kind of situations instinctively wanted to hear better. "I always have to do this with you," Marcus said. His voice dropped, but the quiet made it more carrying, not less. "I always have to manage the fallout because you can't stay in your lane. You can't just be present without needing to fix everything, rearrange everything, be the one who knows better." Something behind Vivian's eyes went very still. "Marcus," she said, just his name. Spoken quietly, like a last point of contact. He wasn't listening. He was somewhere deep inside the part of himself that had been under pressure too long, and was pouring out now, shaped like anger at her. Because anger at her was the safest version, the one that had a face and an address and a history of staying quiet. "You always have to make it about you," he said. "You always have to be the one who—" He didn't finish the sentence. What happened next happened fast. His hand came up, and in the split second before it moved, Vivian registered, with the calm clarity of someone watching an event they could not and were no longer willing to stop, that he was going to do it. She saw it in the angle of his shoulder, in the way his breath shortened, in the look in his eyes, that was not precisely directed at her, but somewhere through her, at all the things she represented that he couldn't control. The sound of the slap cracked through the room like a struck match. Then, silence. Vivian's head had turned to the right. She felt the heat of it immediately, her cheek stinging in a way that was precise and unmistakable and completely clarifying. She turned her head back. She looked at Marcus. He was staring at his own hand with the expression of a man who had jumped from a height and was only now arriving at the bottom. The room didn't breathe. Across the space, near the dessert display, Tessa stood frozen, her glass halfway to her lips. At the center of it all, Helen Hayes had not moved. She stood where she had been standing, her hand still pressed to her chest, and she did not say a word. She did not step forward. She did not correct herself. She did not offer Vivian so much as a glance. That silence was the second thing that landed, heavier than the first. Vivian touched her cheek once, lightly, with 2 fingers. Then she looked at Helen for exactly 3 seconds, not in anger, just in confirmation of something she had suspected for a while. "Okay," Vivian said. She turned, picked up her bag from the chair behind her, and walked toward the hallway door. Her steps were even and measured, neither hurried nor slow. In the doorway she paused without turning around. "Don't follow me," she said. And she pushed through the door. The hallway was dim and narrow, lit by a single fixture above the side exit, and the sound of the party filtered through the closed door behind her, not as voices yet, but as a kind of held collective breath. Vivian stood with her back against the wall for exactly 4 seconds. Then she opened her phone. She had expected this moment in an abstract sense for weeks. She had not known it would arrive tonight, or in this way, or with that specific sound still resonating in the bones of her face. But she had prepared for it the way she prepared for most things that mattered, quietly, thoroughly, without telling anyone who didn't need to know. She dialed Daniel Cho. He answered on the first ring. "It happened," she said. A pause. Brief, professional. "Are you all right?" Yes. She meant it. Her cheek was warm and would likely bruise, but the rest of her felt remarkably composed. Not numb, not suppressed, just clear. The kind of clarity she associated with decisions already made. "I need you at the side entrance. Bring everything. I'm 2 blocks away," he said. "Give me 8 minutes." She ended the call and opened her file system. She had organized these folders the way she organized everything, by category, labeled precisely, with no ambiguity about what each one contained. She moved through them now not in a rush, but with the deliberate focus of someone taking inventory before a presentation. The first folder was labeled Helen's Hearth, Financial Records. She scrolled through it. Bank transfer confirmations, each one time-stamped, each one tied to a specific shop expense. Rent payments for months 3 through 5. 3 supplier invoices she had covered. An emergency inventory order from October, a website repair she had paid for directly when Helen's account came back declined, and at the top of the folder pinned, the funding agreement signed by Helen, dated 6 months, and 3 days ago. 2 clean pages, Helen's signature in blue ink. Vivian had scanned it at full resolution and stored it in 3 separate locations. Below the agreement, the voice note. She pressed play and listened to Helen's voice for exactly 1 sentence. "I can't let him know how bad it's gotten," then stopped it. The second folder, Lease V Meridian Guarantee. Daniel had kept the originals, but Vivian had the copies. The original co-guarantee document with her maiden name in the co-guarantor field, and the photograph she had taken that afternoon of the version Helen's had substituted, the one with her name removed. The metadata on the photograph showed today's date and time. The metadata on the original document showed the week it was executed. The comparison was not subtle. The third folder she opened more slowly. Marcus plus Tessa. She had not wanted to be right about this. She remembered sitting with the backup files on a Sunday afternoon, coffee going cold beside her, and feeling something inside her go very still as the shape of it became clear. Not shock. She had moved past shock weeks earlier when she first noticed the pattern. But something else. Something closer to the particular grief of having your own judgment confirmed in the worst possible direction. The messages were not explicit. They didn't need to be. The timestamps told the story. Late evenings, weekend afternoons when Marcus said he was in meetings, one exchange from a Thursday morning when she had been 3 floors above him in a building downtown for a Crestview review, and he had been texting from the lobby of a hotel she recognized from the geolocation data in the shared backup. She looked at one message from 2 weeks ago and then closed the folder. She had seen enough. She had seen enough weeks ago. A soft knock came from the side entrance. She crossed to it and opened the door. Daniel's assistant stood in the alley, wearing a coat against the evening chill, holding a slim envelope and a small HDMI adapter. He was young, efficient, and had the practiced manner of someone who handled sensitive situations regularly, without requiring context he hadn't been given. "Your lawyer says the system inside will connect directly," he said, handing her the adapter. "HDMI port is standard. The screen is already active for the slideshow." "Thank you," she said. She took the envelope. "What's inside?" 2 copies of the filing, both complete. 1 for each party. She held the envelope for a moment. It was lighter than she expected. Documents that changed lives so rarely had the physical weight of what they contained. "Is there anything else you need?" he asked. "No," she said. "You can go." He nodded once and stepped back into the alley, and she watched him go, and then she turned back toward the hallway and stood in the quiet. She had spent 3 years as his marriage trying to be enough, the right amount of present, the right amount of independent, the right amount of useful without being overbearing, the right amount of soft without being invisible. She had bent herself into so many shapes trying to fit into the negative space of what Marcus and his mother needed from her that she had sometimes lost track of the shape she actually was. She thought about the version of herself that existed in a glass-walled office in downtown Seattle. The version that had built something real, over 8 years, through a combination of judgment and patience, and a willingness to do the unglamorous work that other people overlooked. The version that 43 investors had trusted with their capital and had not been wrong to trust. That version of herself had never apologized for taking up space. She missed her. She tucked the envelope into her bag alongside the HDMI adapter. Through the door, she could hear the party beginning to stir back to life. Marcus's voice, she thought, or Helen's, asking something. The sounds of people recalibrating. People who had just witnessed something that didn't fit their understanding of what this evening was supposed to be. She gave them 2 more minutes. Then she straightened her jacket, checked her phone one last time, and pushed the door back open. It was time to recalibrate their understanding. The double doors opened. The room turned before she had taken 3 steps inside. Not all at once. It happened in a wave, the way attention moved through a crowd when something arrived that changed the temperature. A guest near the entrance straightened. Then the cousin beside him. Then Helen. near the anniversary banner, whose face went through relief, caution, and something close to fear in the space of 2 seconds. Marcus was at the center of the room. He had been speaking, trying to speak, to no one in particular, the posture of a man who had needed to do something with his body while his wife was in another room. When the doors opened, he stopped. Vivian walked past him. She didn't look at him directly. She didn't look at Helen. She moved along the wall toward the display screen, with the focused calm of someone who knew exactly where they were going, which made the room part for her without being asked. "I'd like to say something," she said. Her voice was even. It didn't project dramatically. It simply occupied the space available, which was total, because the room was quiet enough to hear it from 20 feet away. Helen's hand, which had been reaching for a glass of water, stopped. Vivian set her bag on the small table beside the display screen. She took the HDMI adapter from the front pocket and plugged her phone in. The screen, which had been running Helen's anniversary photo montage, 30 years of family images, of shop milestones, of faces smiling at cameras, blinked and held. 6 months ago, Vivian said, Helen came to me because the shop was in trouble. The words were not dramatic. They were factual. The room processed them that way for a moment, uncertain what it was receiving. She asked me not to tell Marcus. She was afraid of what he would think. Vivian looked at Helen once, directly. I understood that, so I helped. She tapped her phone screen. A sound file opened and played through the room's speaker system, the voice note she had recorded in this shop's back office 6 months ago. Helen's voice came through the speakers, soft and cracked and unmistakably real. "Please, Vivian. I can't let him know how bad it's gotten. Just this once. Help me, please." Helen made a sound, a sharp, involuntary intake, and pressed a hand over her mouth. The room was so still, it felt almost pressurized. "That's from 6 months ago," Vivian said. "The night I transferred $18,000 to cover the shop's immediate debts. The first of several transfers." She moved to the TV screen, and the display changed. The anniversary photos replaced by a series of bank records, clean and time-stamped, line after line. Vivian's account on one side, Helen's hearth on the other. Month after month. "This is the rent," Vivian said, without emphasis. 3 consecutive months. "This is the supplier invoices. This is the emergency inventory order in October. This is the website repair." Someone in the back of the room said quietly, "Oh my God." 2 of Helen's long friends had gone completely still. An aunt of Marcus's, standing near the drinks table, lowered her glass. "I kept these records," Vivian said, "not because I planned to use them, because I always keep records. It's a habit. It's safe more than once." She paused. Helen signed an agreement acknowledging the help. She signed it the week after I made the first transfer. I've kept it since then. She brought up the document on screen. 2 pages. Helen's signature in the bottom right corner. Helen had sat down. She wasn't sure when, her legs had simply chosen to no longer support her, and she was in a chair near the side table now. Her hands pressed flat in her lap, her face a rigid mask of controlled distress. Marcus was standing very still. His arms had dropped to his sides. He was looking at the screen with an expression that kept cycling through things, confusion, recalibration, the dawning realization that the story he had absorbed from his mother 40 minutes ago and acted on with his hand was not the story that was in this room. Earlier tonight, Vivian continued, Helen told this room that I had mismanaged the vendor coordination, that the display shortfall was the result of my interference. She swiped to a new screen, the original vendor order, dated March, with Helen's email address in the approved by field. This is the original order. Helen approved it. The quantity discrepancy was a vendor delivery error. I have the confirmation chain. A cousin near the front murmured something to the person beside them. Helen's sister-in-law, who had been quietly nodding along to Helen's earlier version of events, was now looking at the floor. I'm not telling you this to embarrass anyone, Vivian said. Her tone had not changed, still even, still direct, still absent of performance. I'm telling you this because 30 minutes ago, in this room, my husband slapped me, and I think the people who watched that happen deserve to understand what he was given to justify it. That sentence landed differently than the others. It was quieter. It had more weight. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something he could not take back. Vivian looked at him then for the first time since she had walked back in. "There's more," she said. "But first, I want to tell you who V. Meridian is." The room didn't fully understand the question at first. V. Meridian meant nothing to most of the people in it. It was a name on a lease document, a co-guarantor field, that only mattered if you were reading the document closely, which almost none of them had. A few guests exchanged uncertain glances. Marcus was watching Vivian in the way a person watched something they could not quite orient themselves to. Vivian brought the lease document back up on the display screen, the original, the one with her name in the co-guarantor field. She zoomed in on the line. Then beside it, she brought up the version she had photographed that afternoon, the replacement, with her name removed. "Helen's Hearth needed a new lease agreement 5 months ago," she said. "The previous terms were too expensive and the landlord was prepared to let the lease lapse. I arranged a new deal through a property contact, a referral through a company I'm associated with. The terms came back better than Helen had previously managed, significantly better." She looked at Helen. "You know what the contact's name was, Helen. You signed the paperwork." Helen's chin had dropped slightly. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible. "I didn't know it was." "You didn't ask," Vivian said. Not unkindly, simply accurately. She turned back to the room. The lease was facilitated through a holding entity connected to Crestview Holdings. She paused, and her voice shifted, not louder, but somehow more present, the way a person's voice changed when they were about to say something they had been carrying for a long time. "Crestview Holdings is a company I co-founded 8 years ago. I am its co-founder and its majority shareholder. The company's current portfolio valuation is $43 million. The room absorbed this in layers. The first layer was confusion. 43 million was a number that didn't fit the woman people thought they knew. The woman who handled the napkin rings, who kept her opinions quiet at family dinners, who introduced herself at parties as a financial consultant, by which everyone assumed she meant she helped small businesses with their taxes. The second layer was recalculation. The third was something closer to vertigo. Helen had gone gray. Not dramatically. Her color had simply left her face in a way that was unmistakable under the warm party lights. Marcus was absolutely motionless. He was looking at Vivian with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not anger, not hurt, not the particular pride that usually organized his face. It was the look of a man who was trying to rebuild a map from scratch quickly, and was discovering that everything he thought he knew about the terrain was wrong. Vivian turned to him now, fully, and her voice was careful and even. "Your firm has been pitching to Crestview Holdings for 6 months," she said. "A $15 million partnership proposal. Caldwell Partners has submitted 3 revised versions of the proposal. You personally presented the second revision in February." She watched the number arrive in him, watched his face process it, watched him understand. "The senior acquisitions contact your firm has been trying to reach," she said, "is me." The silence that followed was so complete that a guest near the back who had been holding their breath inadvertently exhaled, and the sound was audible. Marcus's mouth opened slightly. Nothing came out. A male cousin near the entrance said, to no one in particular, "He's been pitching to his own wife?" Vivian moved on. She kept her voice level because the remaining things she had to say required level delivery. "There's something else." She swiped her phone. The lease document and bank records disappeared from the screen, replaced by something entirely different, a series of messages. They appeared as text previews, clean, readable, time-stamped. The names at the top were high unmistakable. Marcus, Tessa Klein. Who was standing by the dessert display, went rigid. The messages were not explicit. Vivian had chosen the excerpts carefully because she wasn't interested in humiliation for its own sake. She was interested in clarity, and these excerpts were clear. Timestamps from late evenings Marcus had said he was working late. Language that was intimate in a way that didn't apply to colleagues. References to meetings that Vivian could now attach to specific days when she had been elsewhere and Marcus had been unreachable. Then the photograph. Marcus and Tessa outside a restaurant. his hand resting on the back of her chair, leaning close, the posture of two people who were comfortable with each other's proximity in a way that required explanation. Tessa's composure cracked. "Those messages are private," Vivian said. "I know. They're out of context. They don't." A male relative near the door cut across her. "Wait, hold on." He was looking at Tessa with the squinting focus of someone trying to match a face to a claim. "You told me when you arrived that you were a family friend, that you and Marcus had known each other from his college days." He paused. "I've known Marcus since his college days. I've never seen you before tonight." Tessa's face went through 3 different things in rapid succession. Then she grabbed her coat from the back of a nearby chair. "I'm not doing this," she said. Her voice was controlled but thin. "I don't owe any of you an explanation." She pulled the coat on, and her eyes landed on Marcus for exactly 1 second, a look that was not affectionate, not apologetic, simply tactical, assessing what it would cost her to stay, and then she turned and pushed through the gathered guests toward the exit. The door opened, then it closed. Marcus stood in the space she had left, and the absence of her made everything he had done visible in a way it hadn't been a moment before. Helen pressed both hands over her face. From somewhere in her chest came a sound, low, broken, not quite a sob. Vivian reached into her bag. She placed the envelope on the nearest table, not dramatically, not as a gesture designed to land with force, simply placed it there, the way she would set down any document she was done carrying. 2 copies, Vivian said. 1 for each party. My attorney has the filing reference number. He's outside if you need anything clarified. Marcus stared at the envelope. For a moment, he didn't move at all. Then he crossed the room and picked it up. He opened it the way a person opens something they both needed and dreaded. He unfolded the papers inside, crisp, formal, the language of finality, and he looked at them for a long time without speaking. When he finally looked up, his face had lost all of its edges. The particular sharpness that had organized his expression for most of the evening, the pride, the frustration, the performed certainty was gone. What remained was something younger, something that looked, for the first time, in a long time, genuinely afraid. Vivian. His voice broke, slightly on her name. "I didn't know. About the company. About the shop. I swear, if I had known I know," she said. "I would never have if I'd understood what you were." He stopped. He was trying to find the right version of this sentence, and it wasn't coming, because none of the versions were the right one. "That's the problem, Marcus," she said. Her tone was not hard. It was something more precise than hard. "You didn't know because you didn't ask. Not once in 3 years did you ask about my work in any way that suggested the answer mattered to you. You assumed, and the assumption was comfortable, so you kept it." He opened his mouth. "I'm not angry about being underestimated," she continued. "I've been underestimated my whole life. I've used it. But what I won't do, what I can't do is stay in a marriage where being underestimated is the condition of being loved." A woman near the edge of the room put her hand over her heart. Quiet, involuntary. Helen had uncovered her face. She sat in the chair she had taken, very still, the tears on her face dried into tracks. She was watching Vivian with an expression that was difficult to read from across the room. Not quite guilt, not quite grief, something more complicated than either. Vivian looked at her. "You came to me in tears," Vivian said. "I believed you. I helped you. I kept your secret even when it cost me." She paused. "And tonight you handed Marcus a version of events that you knew would hurt me, and you stood there and said nothing when it did." She didn't wait for a response. "The shop is safe. That won't change. The lease is secure through Crestview. I'm not going to punish Helen's Hearth because of what happened here tonight. That's not who I am." Helen's face crumpled. "Vivian, I'm not done," Vivian said, not unkindly. She looked at the room. The 60 guests who had come tonight for a celebration and found themselves inside something else entirely. She recognized their discomfort. She understood that none of them had signed up for this. "I want to be clear about one more thing," she said, "because I think some of you are wondering." She picked her bag up from the table beside the display screen and turned off the connection. The screen returned to Helen's anniversary photo montage. 30 years of the shop, of family, of the version of this life that had existed before tonight. The image felt different now, Not dishonest, exactly. Just incomplete. I didn't come here tonight planning for this, Vivian said. I came here hoping to be wrong about all of it. I came here because this is my family too, and I didn't want to be the person standing in this room doing what I just did. She looked at Marcus, but he put his hand on me in front of 60 people after his mother handed him a lie. And I decided that the person who needed protecting in this room was me. A long silence followed that. Not uncomfortable exactly, more like a room of people who had received something and needed a moment to hold it. Marcus had been standing very still through this last part. Now he looked down at the divorce papers in his hands, and his shoulders dropped. Not in defeat, but in the particular way a person's body adjusted when they finally stopped fighting a weight they had been carrying in the wrong direction. I don't want this, he said quietly. I know I don't deserve to say that. But I don't want this, I know, Vivian said. But what you want stopped mattering the moment you made that decision. He nodded. Once. Small. Like a person accepting a verdict they had already understood was coming. Across the room, a younger cousin, early 20s, who had been quiet the entire time, turned to the older man beside her and whispered something. The older man nodded slowly, his eyes on Vivian. He had the expression of someone recalibrating a long-held opinion. Helen, from her chair, said, "I'm sorry." The words were simple and inadequate and entirely real. I was ashamed. I was afraid of what he would think of me if he knew. And I made you the easier thing to sacrifice. And I'm sorry. Vivian looked at her for a moment. I heard you the first time, she said. From the hallway, earlier. When you told someone to say the accounts mix-up was my idea. She held Helen's gaze until Helen looked away. That was when I stopped deciding. She picked up her coat from the chair where she had placed it when she arrived. She looked at the room one last time, at the banner over the far wall, at the anniversary photos still cycling gently on the screen, at 60 people who had expected a party and found themselves inside a reckoning. Helen's hearth will still be here on Monday, she said. It'll be here next year. The lease is good. The accounts are clean. Someone built this for 30 years, and that still matters. She paused. It just wasn't built alone. She pulled on her coat, and she walked to the door. The door closed behind her. Outside, the evening air was cool and sharp, the particular kind of cool that came off the water in Seattle after sundown, carrying salt and distance. Vivian stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it in. The sounds of the party, muffled now behind glass and wall, and the collective disorientation of 60 people trying to understand what had just happened receded until they were nothing more than background. She let them go. She walked to her car. She didn't hurry. Behind her, she heard the door open again. Marcus's voice, Vivian, rough, broken open. The way a person sounded when they had arrived somewhere they had never expected to arrive. She stopped walking but didn't turn. I'm sorry, he said. I know it doesn't. He started again. I had no idea what you were protecting, what you'd been doing. I had no idea any of it existed. I know you didn't, she said. She heard him step forward on the pavement, heard him stop himself. What do I do now? He asked. The question was so genuinely lost that for a moment she almost felt the old impulse, the one that had governed so much of her behavior for 3 years, to turn around and offer him a framework, a direction, a way through. She recognized the impulse and let it pass. You sign the papers, she said. You figure out the rest on your own. She opened the car door and got in. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the car before starting the engine. Through the windshield, she could see the front window of Helen's hearth, the anniversary banner, the warm glow of the party lights, the shadows of people moving inside. 60 people processing an evening that had not gone the way anyone planned. Helen's 30 years, her 30 years of work and pride and reputation, reorganized in the space of 20 minutes by the truth Helen had been trying to keep out of the room. Vivian had not wanted any of this. She wanted that on the record, at least with herself. She had not come here tonight hoping to dismantle anything. She had come hoping that she was wrong, that the evidence she had organized so carefully would never need to leave its folders. She had come, if she was honest, still carrying something like hope. What she was leaving with instead was something harder to name. Not peace, not yet. Something closer to solid ground. The feeling of finally standing on a surface that was actually there. She started the engine. In the weeks that followed, the footage, taken on at least 3 phones that evening, circulated through the family's networks with the quiet efficiency of information people felt compelled to share. Marcus's firm opened an internal review of the Crestview situation. There was nothing fraudulent to find he hadn't known, and that was documented clearly. But the conversation itself, the review, the questions it prompted about what he had and hadn't disclosed about his marriage, made his trajectory at Caldwell Partners quietly narrower than it had been. Tessa Klein sent him a brief message 2 days after the party, informing him that the situation was more complicated than she needed right now, and that she hoped he understood. He did not respond. Helen's hearth stayed open. Vivian had meant what she said about the lease. The financial support she had provided was documented in an agreement, and she left that agreement in Daniel's file without pursuing repayment. That was her choice, made clearly and without drama. The shop had been worth saving. That remained true regardless of what came after. Helen called 3 times in the first week. Vivian didn't answer. She wasn't certain she ever would. Not out of cruelty, out of the recognition that some relationships, once they had shown you their true shape, could not be reshaped by apology. She was still deciding. She gave herself permission to take the time. She moved into the apartment she had owned for 4 years, the one Marcus hadn't known about, purchased under her maiden name, kept as a space she could return to if she ever needed to be herself without performing anything. She had furnished it sparsely and well, the way she furnished everything she cared about, with attention to what actually mattered, nothing more. On the first Monday after the party, she sat down at her desk in the Crestview Holdings office, the real office, the one with the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling glass, and opened a new file. Her name was at the top of it, her real name, both of them. The morning was ordinary and quiet, and the coffee was good, and through the glass behind her, the city moved at its usual pace, indifferent and continuous and entirely unconcerned with what she had lost or reclaimed. She found that she didn't mind. She had spent a long time being the kind of person who kept records, who prepared, who built things carefully in places where no one could see. She had always known that eventually the work would speak for itself. Now it had. If you've ever given everything to someone who didn't see it, tell me in the comments. I want to know your story.